It's the 26th of January 2017. A very good evening to you and welcome to another edition of Vantage Point on TV1. You're with me, Krishan Devasagayam. And on Vantage Point, as you know, we talk on the hottest topics that erupt in the political arena, not only in Sri Lanka, but on the global stage as well. And joining us this evening, once again, is the veteran in politics, Dr. Dayan Jayatilaka, a veteran political analyst. A very good evening to you, Doctor, and welcome to the show.
Good evening, Krishan. Good to be here.
Well, Doctor, as we all know, the past 2 weeks was indeed very hot on politics, not only in Sri Lanka, but on the global stage as well. We saw Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe, accompanied by top ministers, attending the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland. We saw the controversial central bank bond issue, the COPE report on the central bank bond issue being debated in Parliament. And, well, of course, in the international circuit, we saw US President Donald Trump being appointed, a much controversial appointment to some. And also we saw the Gambian president, Yahya Jammeh, who was in power for over 22 years, having to vacate his seat. Interesting times in the political arena, don't you think?
Indeed.
Doctor, starting off with news here at home. In his trip to Switzerland, the Prime Minister gave an interview to the BBC World News Service. And in that, he said that there is no final decision on abolishing the executive presidency in Sri Lanka. He said that neither they or the Sri Lanka Freedom Party, which is the party of the president, have made a final decision on this. But, Doctor, don't you think this was the main trump card that, no pun intended, but the main trump card that the national government rode on to come into power back in 2015?
Well, Krishan, I watched that interview, and that's not exactly what Ranil Wickremesinghe, the Prime Minister, said. Zainab Badawi asked him the question about the abolition and said that the Sri Lanka Freedom Party seems to be opposing the abolition. And isn't this precisely the issue on which you rode to power in 2015? The Prime Minister's answer was interesting. He said, the President has not said that he is opposed to the abolition. And the Sri Lanka Freedom Party hasn't officially said that to us. So we'll have to talk about it. Now, that's a little odd to my ears for two reasons. In the first place, in the making of a constitution or the unmaking of an old constitution, what matters is not so much what the president has said, but whether or not you can get the two-thirds majority in Parliament. Now, the president doesn't vote in this matter. What counts is whether Prime Minister Wickremesinghe can secure the support of the Sri Lanka Freedom Party. And I'm not talking about the joint opposition or the bulk of the Sri Lanka Freedom Party, which is with the joint opposition, because that's where the majority of SLFP MPs are. I'm talking about the official SLFP, that's a coalition partner. So, the SLFP has been saying things, and it's in the Sunday Times and so on, that they are not for the abolition of the executive presidency. They've said a few other things, that the status of Buddhism shall not be changed, the unitary status shall not be changed, the merger shall not be permitted, and devolution will be on the basis of the 13th Amendment and will entail the full implementation of the 13th Amendment. That seems to be the SLFP's position, endorsed by the Central Committee. Now, the curious thing here is that the Prime Minister is moving forward, or the fact that they're even talking about a new constitution when they don't have a consensus within the government, let alone between the government and the opposition. I mean, who would want to move ahead on a new constitution when you haven't even got the agreement? All you're saying is, look, they haven't disagreed. Now, that's a strange way to make a new constitution.
But Doctor, why do you think there are such contradictions, such disagreements that exist within the national coalition itself, the government coalition? Don't you think it looks bad on the government, especially when the Prime Minister says such things in a global arena, in a global forum?
Oh, absolutely. But it's really up to the Prime Minister. He should not, in fact, be moving on a new constitution unless, at the very least, he has the complete endorsement and support of his main coalition partner, the Sri Lanka Freedom Party, in what is called a unity government. Now, the unity government is looking increasingly disunited, and is looking disunited not on little issues, but on fundamentals such as the new constitution. Now, you asked me the question as to whether or not the government didn't come into power on this promise. I don't think so. I think what happened was that the people of the North and East voted for the Yahapalana coalition for one set of reasons. A minority of the majority Sinhalese voted for the Yahapalana coalition because they wanted a change from what existed. Everybody was looking for more liberal administration, for a greater individual freedom, and a more relaxed post-war context. And that's why there was a vote for change. Now, as far as the executive presidency goes, there were two promises, two very contradictory ones. The candidates signed one agreement with Venerable Madhuluave Sobita's group, which involved the UNP and former President Chandrika Kumaratunga. And that promised the abolition of the executive presidency. Then he signed another agreement with Venerable Ratana Thero's Pivituru Hetak coalition, two parallel coalitions. And that is what went into the manifesto. What is important is the manifesto. And the manifesto has the wording of the agreement that was signed with Venerable Ratana's coalition. And that wording is that the authoritarian excesses of the executive presidency will be curbed. That the presidency, not that the presidency will be abolished, that the presidency will be trimmed. And it goes on to pledge that there will be no constitutional changes which would require a referendum. Now, so therefore, Venerable Ratana was on television a day or two ago being interviewed, and he says, look, the government doesn't have a mandate to go in for a new constitution. There's no such mandate. And here's the manifesto of President Sirisena. This is what the Sri Lanka Freedom Party is also saying. Now, Ratana Thero is not a member of the opposition. He is a member of the government. Patali Champika Ranawaka, the minister, by definition, is a member of the government. Now, that's another person who says there doesn't have to be a new constitution. That's not what we promised. We promised amendments. The Sri Lanka Freedom Party, which is the main coalition partner of the UNP, says no new constitution. What we need are certainly no abolition of the executive presidency. Nothing that requires a referendum, meaning no new constitution. So, the logical thing to do, Krishan, would be for the government to limit itself to what it can agree upon within its own ranks. Because if you move forward on a new constitution, as Ratana Thero pointed out on television the other night, the UNP doesn't have the numbers. I mean, even if you add the UNP and the TNA and the SLMC, they're not going to get a 2/3 if the SLFP doesn't vote for it. So why embarrass yourself by trying to do that? Why not simply go with a common denominator? Move forward on what you can agree on amongst yourselves, and better still, move forward on what you can agree on with the opposition. Now, that is what happened in 2015. You had the 19th Amendment. Everybody agreed.
Trimming the powers
of the president. So, one wonders why on earth this issue of the presidency is being revisited, because President Sirisena led the movement to reform the presidency in 2015, and the product was the 19th Amendment. Now, the 19th Amendment has been around only for 1 year. we have a drought coming up. Isn't there another priority for the government than to revisit the
Old
executive
issues.
presidency? It has already been reformed, so let it stand for another 10 years and look at it again and see whether the 19th Amendment works, and then change it if you want to. Now, the Sri Lanka Freedom Party, I think, suspects, leave it on the JO, the SLFP in government suspects that what this is a thinly disguised move by the UNP to grab presidential powers or executive powers from an SLFP president. I mean, even if they say that it will kick in only at the end of President Sirisena's term, the moment the new constitution is adopted, then he becomes a lame duck president. And the Prime Minister and the Chief Ministers get the executive power that the President now wields. So the SLFP wonders what's in it for them. There's nothing in it for them. The moment President Sirisena is seen to lose his executive powers and there's a power shift to Prime Minister Wickremesinghe, it entrenches the UNP. So what's the SLFP going to do? It will be weakened within the coalition and it will not be able to go into the opposition either, because the joint opposition is already the dominant force in the opposition. The SLFP will be a junior partner in the opposition. Therefore, it is determined, it would seem at the moment, to resist the abolition of the executive presidency and to resist moving beyond the 13th Amendment, to resist going beyond the unitary framework, and basically to resist anything that would require a referendum, because the SLFP knows, as does Venerable Ratana and Champika Ranawaka, that governments all over the world tend to lose referenda these days.
Exactly. Well, those were the views expressed by Dr. Dayan Jayatillaka on the abolition or the controversy surrounding the executive presidency. We'll be back to discuss the implications of regaining the GSP Plus concession to Sri Lanka after this short commercial break. Stay tuned. Welcome back. You're watching Vantage Point on TV1, and joining us this evening is none other than political analyst Dr. Dayan Jayatillaka. Dr. Dayan, we have the GSP Plus concession that is supposedly in the pipeline, that the government is trying to regain it. This will definitely help the export industry of the country and will be able to send thousands and thousands of goods to the European markets, which is one of our biggest consumers, at a duty-free rate. Do you think the government will be successful in regaining this concession?
Well, Krishan, that's been a source of controversy, not only on the part of the JO, which has been criticizing this for accepting the conditionalities, but even within the government. Evidently, the issue of liberalizing laws concerning gender preference or sexual preference came up in cabinet and received a no vote, a negative response. So that puts a spotlight, so to speak, on the conditionalities. I mean, why did it come up anyway? What has that got to do with anything? It seems from the texts that are available in the media that there are a number of, shall we say, points. I don't want to use the term conditions. Right?
Okay.
I'm willing to be open-minded about it. There are a number of points, and I've read the points, almost 50.
A number of them, yes, close to that amount.
Now, two of those are very awkward indeed, and I'm not talking about sexuality or whatever. That's not something I'm really concerned about. As a former ambassador, I'm concerned about two other points. One is that devolution should be addressed in the context of the making of a new constitution. Two, that transitional justice should move forward. Now, those two issues, Krishan, are eminently sovereign decisions. if a country wants to devolve, it should not be because it can sell its goods
to a foreign
market. I mean, I'm somebody who's for devolution, but I don't think it's anybody's business but our own. And to mention a constitutional process, I mean, if we want to do it through the existing 13th Amendment, well, we can do that.
But what right does a body like the EU, I mean, they talk about democracy, but what right do they have to dictate such terms to a country? Is it because they consider us to be yet inferior to them when it comes to the economy and power and so on?
Well, most of these countries have colonial backgrounds and are responsible for enormous acts of genocide all over the world. Some of them were even responsible for World War II and World War I. I mean, these are all powers with terrible, terrible reputations in the not too distant past.
Future.
But the really crazy thing that's happening here is that countries within the EU are moving out. I mean, look at Britain, Brexit, and Prime Minister Theresa May. She's gone for the hard option. Marine Le Pen, who's a serious contender for the French presidency, has really, harshly criticized the EU. The Prime Minister of Great Britain has more or less said, we are not interested in your common European economic space, your common market. We'll manage on our own. So even European countries are moving away, are reacting against these instructions, these orders from Brussels, which are the whole argument that, well, there's a great economic benefit to be gained by sticking around in this European market.
So are you trying to say that by the time we do, or if we do regain GSP Plus, by the time we do it, it will be to a market that is almost non-existent?
This is certainly one possibility, but what strikes me is that we are very happy that we are about to wear old clothes that have been discarded even by the people and the countries of Europe. So it's really quite anomalous. Certainly if you go beyond Brexit to the Trump election and the Trump inaugural speech, you would see that the Western world is turning away from the economic doctrines that this government here, or the UNP portion of this government, seems to be adhering to.
Doctor, talking about shifting in world politics, as you mentioned, during the past regime, the past few years, we saw, before that, we are a non-aligned country. We signed the non-aligned movement a couple of decades ago. But during the last regime, we saw that we had our alliances shift towards the east, towards China and those powers. But now with the current government, we are trying to get our friendship back with the Western powers, the USA, the European nations. Even though we call ourselves non-aligned, do you think we tend to be shifting and swaying a bit in our political stances when it comes to geopolitics and the global arena?
Well, that's because there's a clear difference of opinion in the government. President Sirisena refers to his policy as one of non-alignment and Asia-centrism within non-alignment. But for the first time since 1961, Sri Lanka did not attend a non-aligned heads of state summit in Venezuela last year. Our president didn't go, the prime minister didn't go, the foreign minister didn't go, the deputy foreign minister didn't go. It's only Minister Mahinda Samarasinha, who does not hold any of those portfolios, who was sent. Now, that's a downgrade of a sort that we've never engaged in. Never. Participating in the non-aligned conference at the highest level has been a bipartisan practice. UNP or SLFP, it doesn't matter. The reason for this is the foreign minister doesn't believe in non-alignment. He's openly said that non-alignment as a concept is outdated. Now, the non-aligned movement is the family we belong to globally. Everybody is a tribe. And the tribe that we belong to is the tribe of third world or developing nations. And that's the non-aligned movement. There's a reason that we belong to it, because it gives us some kind of leverage. We are a small country, and when we belong to a large coalition that gives us some leverage. Now, we have abandoned that. We think that we can have bilateral relations, but we are a small island. We can't do it alone. We have to remain anchored within this coalition, which we were among the founder members of, Krishan, in 1961. Fidel Castro, Nehru, Nkrumah, Nasser, Madam Bandaranaike, Nyerere, those were the founder leaders, Tito, of course, in Belgrade, because this was in Belgrade. We were founders, therefore we are respected. And of course, the fortunes of the non-aligned movement tend to fluctuate, like the fortunes of any family or any tribe. But that's where you belong. Now, we have a foreign minister who doesn't believe that that's our family internationally and that we belong there. Therefore, there's a split in government. Now, I don't know how long this can go on for. And that is the problem. Now, you can turn to China while remaining within the non-aligned family. In fact, in New York, you don't have a grouping called the non-aligned grouping. The non-aligned grouping is part of a larger grouping, and that's the largest grouping in New York at the UN, in the General Assembly, and that's called G77 plus China. That's the group of 77 developing countries plus China. So it's fine when you're within the family and you turn to one successful member. That's China. That's a different story. But here, even in our dealings with China, we are throwing away the non-aligned card.
Doctor, I'll have to interrupt you there. We'll
Sure.
go for a short commercial break, and when we come back, we will definitely talk on the hot topic in the global arena, which is the appointment and the inauguration of US President Donald Trump. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Now, as we saw on the 20th of January, a new person took the seat of President of the United States, widely believed to be the most powerful position in the entire world. And the person who is now seated on that chair for the next 4 years is Donald J. Trump, a person who came to power, who came to occupy that seat with much controversy. On one hand, we saw his supporters widely hoping for a change with him coming into power, while there were so many protesters, critics of his, taking to the streets, protesting against his inauguration. But that's left to be seen in the next 4 years, what actions he will take. Doctor, my question to you is this. Donald J. Trump, a new person, completely different viewpoints, and he's already taken drastic steps. He's already, on his very first day in office, he signed executive orders removing the United States from the Trans-Pacific Partnership deal, trade deal, something that President Obama, his predecessor, worked hardly to get into. Do you think Sri Lanka will have any implications or will be affected positively or negatively with Donald Trump being in power in the White House?
Well, yes, but it rather depends on how Sri Lanka plays it. If you take the issue of the UN Human Rights Council resolution and the co-sponsorship by Sri Lanka of a resolution that recommends the setting up of special courts, preferably with international participation, to try our armed forces. Now, that is an issue on which the Trump victory gives Sri Lanka space to renegotiate. Now, whether the government of Sri Lanka will do so or not, I don't know. But certainly, the opportunity is there to be explored. And there are people that the government can reach out to Sri Lankans who have contacts with the Republican administration. There are Sri Lankans, I mean, former President Jayawardena's, the late President Jayawardena's grandson, Pradeep Jayawardena, who was one of our diplomats. He's somebody who's a member of President Sirisena's SLFP now. Now, he's someone who has contacts with the new Republican administration. Milinda Moragoda has contacts with the Republican administration. So, President Sirisena has the ability to reach out if he wants to and if he is allowed to by the foreign minister. This is one thing. The second thing is that the world is going to change as a result of Trump's victory and the reactions to that victory. There's going to be a recomposition, a realignment. And Sri Lanka has to maximize its autonomy and its national interest. The problem is that the new government, as I said, is divided on foreign policy. National interest is usually seen as widening one's autonomy as a nation. But Prime Minister Wickremesinghe and Foreign Minister Samaraweera, as well as former President Kumaratunga, who has an unspecified role, seem to believe that the national interest is served not by maximizing autonomy, but precisely by plugging in with the West and India and China and whoever else is there. So, your autonomy is actually reduced. Now, President Trump, in his inaugural speech, has said some very important things which Sri Lanka should study, especially in the realm of economic policy. He says, no more outflow of jobs. Now, these trade pacts, which is beginning to pull out of, and free trade areas and so on that is looking again at, there's a reaction against them, and that's why he won. Just as there was a reaction against them in Europe, and that's why Britain has exited.
She exited the EU.
The evidence seems to show that this indiscriminate integration with whoever is around means that your jobs flow to low wage areas. For instance, if we over-integrate with India, as Prime Minister Wickremesinghe wants to do, he said it in Davos about integration with the 5 South Indian states as well as ETCA. He's also talked about handing over Trinco or working with India to develop Trincomalee and so on.
Port.
Now, President Trump seems to be saying, or rather saying very explicitly, that this means that local jobs, national jobs, are affected because jobs go abroad, foreigners come and take your own jobs. And this is America, this is a very powerful country, not a small island in the Indian Ocean. If it can affect America so badly, and now he says, no, we produce American, you buy American, we rebuild our national manufacturing strength, we protect our borders. He actually said our borders are back, we have our borders again. So borders are important. But the UNP government, or rather the government that's led by the UNP, seems to believe that there's no such thing as borders and that borders are bad and that you should open everything up, give away all your ports and integrate into the economies of everybody else. But President Trump says that leads to an outflow of jobs, it leads to an inflow of immigration which takes your jobs, it leads to a weakening of your manufacturing base and your industries get affected. And that's it. We are not doing that anymore.
Rusted out factories in his own words.
Rusted out. So economic protectionism, he actually uses the word protection. Economic protectionism is back. But the Sri Lankan Prime Minister seems to be living in another era.
Well, indeed, 2017 is definitely going to be a year that we all should look out for, not only in Sri Lanka, but to see how the political arena, the political stage plays out for the future generations. Well, thank you, Doctor, for joining us this evening. And it was a pleasure having you with us.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Well, stay tuned to Vantage Point. We'll be back, same place, same time, in another 2 weeks to bring you the very latest that's happening here at home and across the globe. Take care and good night.